The Jewish Channel's Week in Review. Iran's presence at the United Nations General Assembly leads to protest and rabbis getting arrested. The nascent Obama-Netanyahu relationship merits an entire academic conference with experts and diplomats. As the high holidays continue, repentance on a billboard and with a rabbi as a bartender, and more of the Jewish news that's changing your world in this webcast version of the Week in Review. Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. There's no doubt that foreign policy and diplomacy regarding the United States, Israel, and Iran was top of mind for many in the Jewish community this week. Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's presence at the United Nations General Assembly led to significant protests from many different groups. And as President Barack Obama spoke at the UN and met with Israeli and Palestinian leadership, many were on the lookout for signs of change in the Middle East. President Obama spoke on both of these topics of Iran and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The president spoke of his meeting earlier this week with Israeli and Palestinian leaders and repeated much of his previous messages regarding negotiations for peace. On the topic of Iran, Obama linked the governments of Iran and North Korea, saying, "In their actions to date, the governments of North Korea and Iran threaten to take us down this dangerous slope. We respect their rights as members of the community of nations. I've said before and will repeat, I am committed to diplomacy that opens a path to greater prosperity and more secure peace for both nations if they live up to their obligations. But if the governments of Iran and North Korea choose to ignore international standards, if they are oblivious to the dangers of escalating nuclear arms races in both East Asia and the Middle East, then they must be held accountable." Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad struck a very different tone. Ahmedinejad referred to Israel in mentioning inhuman policies in Palestine and said the awakening of nations and the expansion of freedom worldwide will no longer allow them to continue their hypocrisy and vicious attitudes. Ahmedinejad also addressed the controversy over the recent election in Iran by saying, "Our nation has gone through a glorious and fully democratic election, opening a new chapter for our country in the march towards national progress and enhanced international interactions." And as Ahmadinejad spoke, protesters of many kinds were gathered outside. In one particular protest, a group of rabbis was arrested in front of the United Nations. Dozens of rabbis gathered just across the street from the United Nations headquarters to protest the presence and applause granted to Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad at the General Assembly. It's a protest that ended with 12 rabbis arrested to indicate their level of concern regarding Iran.
Our enemy, of course, is not New York City's police. We bless you, the fine men and women of New York City Police. But our enemy is that building right behind us, who gave a standing ovation to Gaddafi, who gives a standing ovation to the president of Iran. Rabbis blocking traffic in front of the United Nations were warned that their continued presence there would result in arrest. But even for those not among the 12 who were eventually handcuffed and loaded into paddy wagons, there was a rabbinic message about Iran's president.
We're hoping to make a major statement as rabbis because we feel rabbis are descendants of the prophetic tradition, and they have to speak out on all moral issues. And there's nothing more immoral than allowing this kind of murderer to be given a standing ovation, to be given a dignified presence at the United Nations. He's threatened Israel, he threatens his own people, and he should be stopped.
We've got more from this protest, including some surprising news about the impact of pro-Ahmadinejad protesters among Satmar Hasidim and Neturei Karta in the full broadcast version of the Week in Review. There's even more protests of Ahmadinejad occurring as we go to air this week, and we'll have more on those protests in next week's broadcast. Meanwhile, another area of major concern for American Jews is U.S.-Israel diplomacy, and particularly how President Obama and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu will proceed in negotiations. It's unusual to see such a topic tackled in the academic world just as it's proceeding, but an academic conference addressing the Obama-Netanyahu relationship was held last week, just in time for diplomacy to kick into high gear. Christian Needon reports.
In ripped from the headlines fashion, Middle East experts and diplomats gathered for an academic conference, U.S.-Israel relations in the era of Obama and Netanyahu. The conference, held at Yeshiva University, jumped into this topic head first, eliciting policy proclamations and disagreements from some who will be at the forefront of future negotiations. Former U.S. Ambassador to Israel Daniel Kurtzer, who worked on Middle East issues with President Barack Obama during the 2008 campaign, pointed out that the president and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had already been building their relationship for at least a year before their summit in May 2009 with 2 previous meetings. To see more on how these diplomats and academics view the Obama-Netanyahu relationship and what statements got the crowd applauding, tune into the broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Christian. Turning from issues of foreign policy to those of personal inquiry that are the theme of the high holidays, two interesting innovations in the approach to repentance are explored in this week's newscast. First, Rebecca Honig-Friedman looks at messages of introspection on a billboard in the most traffic spot in the world.
This Jewish New Year, the introspective spirit of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur has come to Times Square with a jumbotron that asks busy New Yorkers and tourists alike to reflect on the past year. Each day from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, the PR Newswire Jumbotron on 43rd Street and 7th Avenue is featuring 10 soul-searching questions as part of a web-based project called 10Q, designed to get Jews and non-Jews alike to slow down for a few thoughtful minutes.
Thinking about how busy people are with the internet and phones and Twittering and all of that, we wanted to create a space online to give people a couple minutes a day to just think about these questions. And this seemed like the right time of the year, both for Jews because of the high holidays and for non-Jews because of the back-to-school autumn feeling.
So what questions are being broadcast in Times Square, and what do those passing by have to say? Find out in the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Rebecca. And finally, you might wonder how an art exhibit could lead you to repentance. Margie Rauhut was wondering the same thing, and that's the subject of this story.
From a collage of solicited personal stories, to a performance piece about the asking for forgiveness, to the regret-o-rama where visitors are able to write a repenting email, art and religion is blended for a profound effect.
So art, one of the great things about art, it challenges us to think differently. It gets us out of the normal way of doing it. And I like to think of religion as an art form as well.
To find out more about the House of Awe and Repentance and learn why the rabbi has installed himself behind the bar, see the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Margie. That's all for this week. For more news and analysis from the Jewish Channel during the week, please check out our blog at newsdesk.tjctv.com. For the full broadcast version of the Week in Review, please stop by the Jewish Channel on cable. From all of us here at the Jewish Channel, be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable: IO Optimum Cable Channel 291, Time Warner Cable Channel 528, RCN Channel 268, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and Cox Cable Channel 1. For more information, visit tjctv.com.